Let's resume our session. Item 4 in the agenda today is vapors are here to stay. We are here to stay, of course. Let's start with Louise Ross, leader of the service to quit it in Leicester, in the UK. She will discuss learning from services to quit it in the UK. Do ecigs actually work to quit? The floor goes to her.
Before I start, can I also ask us to thank the lovely David, who's done all the techie support, and the awesome interpreters who, I don't know how they've kept up with the science of this, but big round of applause for them, yes? Okay, so I'm talking about the English Stop Smoking Services, or one, the Stop Smoking Service that I ran until March this year. Oh, sorry, that's my declaration. No income from any of the industries. There we go. So, you know, first of all, people are bound to ask, who says it's safe and effective? Well, we've heard a lot today from experts in the field, but England, as we know, or the UK, has been a real leader in this field internationally. And we've gathered an enormous number of organisations who have put their names behind the use of e-cigarettes to stop smoking. Not because they have any interest apart from reducing smoking prevalence. And some may not have been totally sold on the idea first of all, but have come along as the evidence has grown. And you know, I think we've got a really good model in the UK that you know we have seen other countries take on. So there we go. So Leicester is a small city about 100 miles north of London. You can drive from one side to the other in about 20 minutes. So we're quite insignificant in a way in terms of national geography, but very powerful in terms of our reputation, the influence we've had on the UK and other countries, the connections we've made, partly because of service results. We've actually been doing it for, well, since 2014 we became e-cig friendly, and we've got consistent results that underscore the importance of using vaping as part of smoking cessation. And it's helped us grow in confidence, because when we started this, it was really on a leap of faith. We had no idea whether this was going to work, but we had listened to Vapers and we knew that something had to change, because of course people had stopped using the stop smoking services as much as they used to. At one time we had queues of people waiting to join our clinics. That stopped happening, and e-cigarettes were definitely part of the trend of less and less use. So our confidence rose as we started to incorporate the idea of vaping in our smoking cessation journey. And we made this change, as I say, by listening to Vapers. The very early adopters, if you like, among our service users were saying things like, this was a revelation. When's the difficult part going to stop? Because of course everybody thinks that it's so hard to stop smoking. But in fact, when they started vaping, they found it so much easier than they expected. And we were stunned by this. You know, we never had people saying that about nicotine replacement therapy, a little bit maybe about varenicline, but not with the conviction that we heard from Vapers. We asked a lot of questions. We involved Vapers, so we had people come into our team meetings to talk to our staff, because they were the experts. We weren't. We were in a whole new geography here. And we had to get comfortable with the fact that we weren't the experts. So I had team members, for instance, saying, I don't know what to say to people. You know, they asked me what strength to use, what devices. They didn't know enough. We had to firstly educate ourselves, but also be quite comfortable with the fact that we could say, I don't know the answer to that. Go to a vape shop, talk to somebody with experience. And of course, you know, every experienced vapor is going to be delighted to be asked by a smoker, you know, what is that? How do you use it? Can I have a go? And, you know, I've never come across any vapor who said, I'm sorry, I'm too busy to talk to you. It just doesn't happen, does it? And our service results I was very pleased to see, because I'm the manager of the service and I didn't want to sort of like, you know, fall on my face over this, have consistently shown that once you add an e-cigarette to usual care, you get much better results. So, I mean, I'm not very good at graphs and that sort of thing. I've tried to simplify it so at least I can understand it. But you can see that the numbers, oops, sorry, back again. The numbers of people using e-cigarettes have grown year on year, and the success has stayed consistent. We would often see a dip in use every time there was a terrible story. So, you know, popcorn lung, formaldehyde, you know, suddenly use would drop, but then the team would talk to people and regain their confidence. And we were asked often, you know, who are these people then? Who are the ones using e-cigarettes? On the assumption that it's usually the better educated people, the people with more money. We found it not so. Pretty much an even split between men and women. Some under 18s, very few in fact. This is from 16, 17. Quite a few older people. And it's lovely to see a really old person who in previous years would have said, I've smoked for 50 years, I'm not going to stop now. They wanted to stop too, and that was a cause of tremendous pleasure for us as the team. But, you know, this is important. 77% from health inequalities groups. And Ricardo asked the question, how do we get these products into the hands of people who are too poor to actually, you know, maybe splash out 20 or 30 quid on a starter device? We gave them out. We bought enough products to be able to give out a starter kit, and, you know, the experienced vapers and scientists in the room will say that what we were giving out probably wasn't very effective, but it was enough for a proof of concept. They would try it, like it, and in that first couple of weeks while they were using what we gave them, they could save up enough money for something a bit better. And of course many would then go on to buy, you know, something fancy, something much better than what we could afford. So in fact we didn't need a prescribed product. You know, we haven't been waiting for that. We have just given out samples, and we say to people, it's not a medication, it's just a free sample, we just happen to have some at the moment, you don't have to accept it, because we don't want, you know, somebody to say, oh, you know, they forced this on me, I didn't want to use it. But in fact most people accept it very gratefully and do very well with it. Pregnant women as well. You know, we at first we were a little bit nervous about the idea of pregnant women vaping, but of course we realised that they were going to smoke anyway, so why not give them the same chance to reduce the harm to themselves and their baby by, you know, talking positively about vaping. And in fact I've just had the figures from last year's service results, and about the same amount of people used NRT as those that used e-cigarettes. The ones who vaped were twice as likely to stop smoking. So twice as many of those actually stopped smoking with vaping, which I think is a great result. How my team learned. Again, I can't stress this enough. You know, it's so important to listen to people who have actually gone through this. This man is Chris Baxter. He talked with me in Manchester at an event about vaping. I'd never met him before. I put out a tweet saying, you know, any Manchester vapers want to come and do a little gig with me? And he came along. Now, 3 years before that, he hadn't even been able to walk up the stairs without stopping halfway and gasping. And now, after vaping for a couple of years, he's doing hill running. I couldn't hill run, but he, you know, and he's, you know, you can see he's not a young man, but he's hill running and he's really proud of his achievements, and he puts it down to the improved lung function that he has because he's not smoking, he's vaping. But they have common features. You know, most of them that have used vaping with us, they'd stopped trying to stop smoking. They had just thought, that's it forever now. And so it is a revelation for them. They see an improvement in health just as quickly as those that stop with NRT, with varenicline, with anything else. You know, they can breathe better, they need fewer medicines for their respiratory problems, they can be more active. But, and they want to tell others, my God, they're evangelistic. You know, one of my advisors said that all her vapers were turning into stop smoking advisors. So they were going around sort of like, telling their friends and family, you've got to try this. But they see it as a consumer product. They're not asking for a medication. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important that there should be something that can be prescribed. For those that simply can't afford it, that should be an option. But it's not a medication. It's a consumer product. Recreational nicotine is something really difficult for stop smoking services, doctors, nurses to get their heads around, and public health people, of course, as well. Because for years they have, that they've said, that, as we've heard already, it's as addictive as heroin, that people fear that it's carcinogenic and so on. And it's the fact that it's part of something that looks like smoking. But there's a real double standard here. And, I've talked to public health groups where they're, nicotine, bad. Of course, they're all looking forward to their alcohol at the end of a session. They can't wait to get a glass of wine in their hands. Nothing wrong with that. Or people will say, oh, I'm addicted to coffee. I've got to have 8 coffees before I can get going. And that's a big laugh, isn't it? But, if you're, dependent on nicotine, you're seen somehow to be, a little bit weak, a little bit in need of some help, and we've got to change that. We really have. And one of the greatest reasons is that I believe it is a protective factor against relapse. That many people in the stop smoking service will get to that 4-week quit. In the UK, we measure success at 4 weeks, and after 12 weeks, when their treatment episode finishes, no more nicotine. And of course, the first time they have a disaster, they lose their job, they're bored, they go to a wedding or a funeral or something like that, they go back to smoking. So having a vaporizer handy and knowing how to use it protects against that relapse moment. It's a comforting ritual, as many people have said before today. It feels like smoking. We asked one service user why the Nicorette inhalator isn't good enough, because you suck it, there's a hand-to-mouth action, so it feels a bit like a cigarette. And they said there's no smoke, and that was really important to this particular woman. She, the vapor around felt like what she was used to. Very important to her. And the companionship. There aren't any NRT clubs. You don't go to NRT expos, as somebody said earlier. So that companionship, talking about the habit, comparing devices. And so those naive vapers found comfort in the community that came with vaping. We find that retailers are really important. We've had retailers in to discuss how they talk to their customers. And again, in the public health world, I think there's a real prejudice against the commercial interests of vape shops. People will say they just want to make money out of addiction or a habit. Well, we all want to make money. We don't do our jobs for nothing. We've got to live. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, Judy does. A round of applause for Judy. Yeah, I know. They want to earn a living, but they understand their customers' needs. And at the NCSCT, which is the training body that I do some freelance work for, we've just brought out a guide for public health people to work with vape shops. So perhaps have a look on the NCSCT website and see what you think of that. They understand their customers' needs possibly more than stop smoking advisors, who in a way, I think, have lost touch with how smokers actually want to transition. It's too far away from their experience. Team concerns, how do we include ecigs in usual care? It works very well, and I'll come on to a slide in a minute about how to combine what we would normally offer in terms of stop smoking products with e-cigarettes. What happens if something happens? What if something happens that we get blamed for? People are very worried that they will get sued if somebody goes and has a heart attack once they start vaping. But look, these people have smoked for years, and that's where the harm comes from, not introducing a new product that actually reduces their harm. Why not just focus on what works? Because people have done that. They've tried and failed many times with NRT. If we know that there's something that is going to be more effective, use that. Don't piss about waiting for them to fail again. Just get on with it and you know, get them in touch with something that we know will work and that other people have said is going to be satisfactory. I've covered the expert issue before. The myths, again, that's the problem with talking at 5 o'clock. A lot of this we've already gone through, so it'll save time. We haven't talked so much about popcorn lung, though. And in my experience as a service manager, that is the biggest fear. We must get queries about popcorn lung every single day. And I think it's because the image of popcorn lung is so much stronger than lung cancer. You know, people don't necessarily think what lung cancer looks like, feels like, but they have this kind of idea about, you know, your chest full of popcorn, which is, of course, not what it is. But, oh my God, it gets into their psyche. And so we have to deal with all that sort of stuff. So part of the challenge, in a way, for a service manager or a commissioner is to educate the advisors on what to say when a patient says, you know, what about popcorn lung? You know, because you can't have an advisor saying, I don't know really. You've got to teach them about that. The gateway we've talked about, flavours. Who owns the brand? That's really important to people. It's often believed that most of the brands that are available are actually owned by the tobacco industry, and of course, you know, we know that's not true. A lot of people are very keen to know that the product that we're using is independent of the tobacco industry. So we've taken a stance to not use tobacco industry products. Now, I know that some of them are very good, and a lot of people have said to me, you know, what's the difference? But it's about ideology. It's not necessarily right, but it's important to the people who are actually making this transition. So that's what we uphold. And explosions, of course, you know. You don't get front page headlines about all the people who die from smoking, but you know, if a vaporizer explodes, you know, all over the front page. So, you know, it's really important that we convey issues about battery safety. You know, don't put your spare battery in your pocket with your keys and your loose change. And that's part of what an advisor should be telling the naive vapor, because they won't know otherwise, will they? What does it take to see vaping as a valid alternative? This is about strongly held beliefs, and we are dealing with some very strongly held beliefs counter to what we believe. So, you know, we have to state our case very firmly. Believe that the gate swings out of smoking. You know, we know that this is a gateway out of smoking. Believe that every time you see somebody vape, it's somebody not smoking. Now, there's a lot of ideologically driven distaste for the sight of people vaping. You know, a lot of people vaping here, and you know, if we had a lot of public health people here, nurses or doctors, they may well be saying, as they have many times to me, it looks like smoking, I can't stand to see it, I don't want to see it. Just remember, that is somebody who is not smoking. They will accelerate tobacco harm reduction. I can state that unequivocally, if people will just get on board with it. And believe people when they tell their stories. I think this is what's missing. Policymakers are not listening to the consumer. They start with their ideology and they stay in their little cocoon. They need to get out there and talk to people who are actually doing it, and then they may, you know, see some different views. Mixing and matching. So, as I've said, we use a number of different medical products for stopping smoking, and in all sorts of ways you can combine vaping with these. One of the biggest surprises, has been vaping with Champix. It's counterintuitive. One would think that something that actually blocks the nicotine receptors in your head wouldn't work with vaping, but the small numbers in our service that have used it, people have said it worked really well for them, and the service results back this up as well. Very high success rates with vaping and Champix. So I would encourage advisors, doctors, nurses, anybody in that place of influence to, to encourage people to go for it, try it. It doesn't suit everybody. So some people will have tried this and they just do not get on with it. So they have to have an alternative that they will use. And, plenty of people are still stopping with NRT. Some will hope to stop all nicotine use eventually, and that's fine. If somebody wants to be completely nicotine free, that is their choice, and I emphasize it's their choice. It is not for us to say you need to get off all that altogether, as some will do. And some want at the beginning of their stop smoking journey to stop all nicotine use, and then as the weeks go by, they will decide that actually that's not bad. It's pleasant. Happy to keep using it. They might want to titrate down, and sometimes even maybe use zero nic strengths and alternate it. So most of our service users who've done that have now got 2 devices, and one will maybe have a very low strength. The other device they have will have a higher strength to mix and match. What to say to patients? This is really important for doctors and nurses. So I know we haven't got that many doctors and nurses in the room, but go and tell people, spread the word. If you've tried to stop smoking before, have you tried an e-cigarette? Don't be afraid to suggest it. And I think that's what stops some doctors and nurses. They're afraid to suggest it in case they say the wrong thing. It's absolutely the right thing to say. But, have you tried one of the better ones? This is important, that when you talk to people and say, oh, yeah, I've tried vaping, it's awful. What they tried was probably some tiny little rubbish device that they bought from the pound shop, or whatever, or from the garage, yes. So it'll have very low nicotine strength, a tiny little battery. It won't taste particularly good. So they need to be made aware that there are much better products on the market, and that's what they should be trying. We've talked about the prejudice and the myths. So, more encouragement all round. And remember, a lot of deaths from cigarettes. When have we ever heard about a death from an e-cigarette? Even what?
The one that exploded.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yes. And that poor man in the States recently who, it was decided that he died because he was vaping. And, on the post-mortem, they found he was very ill anyway. It was nothing to do with vaping, but of course, you never see that story where it's corrected. It's not just about the general population. I think if you come across resistance and objections to the idea of introducing the idea of vaping into a stop smoking model, use the argument that it is people who are very poor, very ill, or who have poor mental health. When you talk about people with mental health, when we know how many mentally ill people smoke, it's a no-brainer to get them onto vaping. And at our local hospital for people with poor mental health, we have a vape shop. Go in with a stall and sell stuff, so that they have to be in a smoke-free environment, but these people can actually buy a vaporizer and use it when on the wards, and nursing staff go and buy from there as well. So it's been very popular. Even doing work with homeless people, getting them started, because they want to stop smoking too. So we have a mutual arrangement with the local vape shop where they will get heavily discounted products to keep them smoke-free. The danger is that, of course, people, pass somebody who's begging in the street and they give them a fag. But, even if they never completely stop, there is a harm reduction idea there as well. And fire safety for vulnerable smokers. We've done work with the fire department who go and do home fire safety checks with people who are so poorly they never get out of their beds or their chairs, and they sit there with their nighties with burn marks all over them and a ring of burn marks on the carpet. They should swap to vaping to stop them burning themselves to death with a cigarette. So the take-home messages. you know, and language is so important. You know, you don't smoke them. Correct people every time you hear them say smoking an e-cigarette. You do not smoke them. Try and push for that distinction between smoking and vaping. You know, hospitals in the UK have been shocking, you know, in terms of banning all smoking, banning cigarettes, but also banning vaping on site, not realising that that would have been an ideal opportunity to get people to switch, even for the day that they're visiting hospital, to something safer. So talk about that a lot. Recording patients is really important. We've still come across healthcare professionals who, when they find out that somebody is vaping, say, well, you're still smoking, you're still using nicotine. They are not. They are ex-smokers if they've completely transitioned from using a smoked cigarette. And finally, and I think this is what I bang on about more than anything, don't push them to come off vaping, because you will find that they go back to a cigarette so quickly once they're not getting that clean nicotine. Because it's so much easier, isn't it? You know, vaping is an art. The technicality of it is tricky. So much easier to just go and get a cigarette. So they need encouragement to keep going. Thank you very much. Hello.
I think what you said about the specific vocabulary is very, very important. I have also written a whole article about it, and it hasn't been enough emphasized today. We've called all day long those devices ecigs, while in my shop, this name has disappeared completely. I call them vaporizers, because it needs to have its own specific vocabulary instead of hopping on a node industry.
I completely agree with you. I hate the word e-cigarette,
yeah,
because they're not electronic in that way. They're certainly not cigarettes, exactly. And it just perpetuates. So I try and use the word vaporizer as much as possible.
Which we did.
I think you've made a very, very good point. And if we could all put the clock back to whenever we first, whoever it was, called them e-cigarettes, you know, we would. Only it's now become, you know, part of the zeitgeist, and it's very, very difficult. But INCO, which is the organisation I represent, which is the International Network of Nicotine Consumer Organisations. I'll say this now because don't ask me when I'm pissed later on, because it'll come out wrong. Okay. But we tried very much, because we have 36 different consumer organisations, of which, and as Vape is one, as is Move, and indeed Angeleth, unfortunately, who's not here, is in fact a director of, on the board of INCO. So just to get to the point here, sorry, it was just a bit of a sales gimmick there, is that we were trying in different smaller countries, like New Zealand, for instance, that's a relatively nascent vaping rise, to change it to e-liquid vaporizers, which would be quite easy as an acronym. It's just ELVs. And the reason... I know, and that's... yes, I know, but we call it e-liquid, and that's already... Look, nothing's perfect. Okay, we could just call it liquid vaporizers, but I think then that sounds like something out of, you know, science fiction. The point being that I think it is important for, we support everything, which is, in other words, if it's less risky, including heat not burn, including snus, so that's why it's nicotine consumer rather than vapors. But we now have the heat not burn, and what is happening is that they're calling those e-cigarettes as well. So when in fact you have a headline that says, e-cigarettes found to be, and there was one quite recently, now I mean, it was still wrong, but then you read the main part of the article, and in fact they were talking about an IQOS, which is another reason that we might all think about changing the name. Yes, I know there's no such thing as electronic liquid, but e-liquid vaporizers, ELVs, is easy. It has to be something simple, so it's just something to think about.
Just vaping product, whatever. I paid a lot of attention when I organized the first, what is called in England, ecigs summit. I paid a lot of attention to call it Vaping Summit, and we succeeded with the government in the implementation of the TPD to have it, they call product vapor products. They don't call them e-cigarettes.
The term e-cigarette, we've had a lot of discussion about that, but there is a, for us, it's very nice to say, no, not a cigarette, not a cigarette. But for smokers, it's a good catch because we tend to think smokers smoke, they smoke cigarettes. So it's easier to relate to something that just adds an E. So yes. It has this. That's an advantage. We should also consider that. And it has an impact on smokers. If you tell a smoker vaporizer, it's something unrelated to his habit or her habit. If you say e-cigarette, there is a relation. So that's an angle.
You're right, and you can't dictate what the actual consumer is saying. So if somebody says to me, "Oh, I quite like them e-smokes," you know, I wouldn't berate them for it. But I do have a responsibility, I think, to correct healthcare professionals when they get it wrong. Okay. Thank you.